One of the main reasons why America's economy is flourishing is because of one particular group of consumers. I'm Tyrone Bowman. This is Tyrone Bowman Tonight. The topic of discussion: black boycotting. The term boycotting is defined as withdrawal from commercial or social relations with a country, organization, or person as a punishment for protest. Boycotting is also defined as spurn, snub, cold shoulder, shun, avoid, steer clear of, give a wide berth, B-E-R-T-H, to, have nothing to do with. During the civil rights era, when segregation and non-integration was in effect, our foreparents could not ride, with the exception of designated places in the back of the bus. And this had gone on for quite some time, until a young preacher by the name of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been chosen to lead the newly organized Montgomery Boycott Association. I probably got the name wrong. I'll fact check it later. Dr. King was chosen because, as a young pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, he was relatively new in town, and therefore he would not have been recognized. What individuals didn't know and understand, and for those of you that are not students of history, pay attention to what I'm talking about here tonight. We have a power that's more powerful than any other group of people in the world. Other communities, ethnicities, and groups of people, they have powerful voting blocks. They have powerful lobbying experts on their behalf. They have powerful political power and economic power. Why? Because they are entrepreneurs and they are engaged in several types of businesses, everything from finance to commerce to the food industry and the clothing industry as well. When you know what the power of boycotting can do, and if it's used responsibly, you will find out that others will begin to respect you as you respect yourself. The destabilization of the economic fabric of the Black American came in effect as a result of desegregation. Up until that time, we as a people were independently sufficient amongst ourselves. We really didn't have to depend upon subsidies and things of that nature because we supported one another. And the moment desegregation came into effect, people thought it was a beautiful thing. You know what it did? It crippled, maligned, and destroyed the black economy. Whether you believe it or not, this is an historical fact. Do you think that the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre occurred simply because of a young Caucasian woman accusing a young black guy of raping her and groping her inside the elevator? It was much more deeper than that. It occurred because Black Wall Street was flourishing at an unprecedented rate economically, with self-sufficiency of doing for self. And this is something you better learn, how to do for self. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught the fathers of the Nation of Islam how to become entrepreneurs by doing for themselves. Too many times people think that the power of boycotting will not work. When people don't respect you, they don't respect your money. Going back to what happened down in Montgomery, for one solid year, our people, black people, stopped riding the buses. They were losing $50,000 per day. The bus company was on the verge of bankruptcy. They tried to go to court to make black people ride the buses again. How did our people get around? It was simple. Carpooling. It worked then, and it'll work now. What you don't understand is that there is a market out there that is gunning for your money. And I'm about to talk about a powerful article entitled a $300 billion opportunity serving black American consumer. Wow. This is real. We can do, be, and have like anyone else. Do you know why President Barack Obama became the first African American president of the United States of America? It was simple: to save the American economy. And that is real. He did it, and he did it well. What are you going to do about your life and preserving what you have? So back to the definition of boycotting. Turn one's back on, have nothing to do with. Wash one's hands of. Ban, bar, reject, veto. A veto is a boycott. Embargo, prohibit, outlaw, proscribe. I found an article, and I'm going to read it now. I found an article online. It's entitled A $300 Billion Opportunity Serving the Emerging Black American Consumer. And I'm going to read this article in its entirety. It was written by Michael Chewy, Brian Gregg, Sajal Kohai, and Shelley Stewart. So what I'll be reading in quotation marks. This will be part one. Quote, "There's a big market to be unearthed if companies meet the real needs of black consumers. For decades and decades, black consumers have been regularly overlooked by companies that don't see them as priority demographic. Black consumers continue to be underserved in areas such as food, housing, healthcare, broadband, and banking. Essential needs are going unmet because of decisions made by companies. Yet these companies may well be missing the chance to cultivate a significant emerging market. With a little ingenuity and deeper analysis, companies may find that serving the black American consumer will allow them to tap into significant value while contributing to a meaningful economic revival. Black households do have fewer income and wealth. Despite being 13.4% of the U.S. population, black households accounted for just under 10% of the nation's total spending on goods and services in 2019. Because black workers bring home smaller paychecks, they have less money to work with every month, especially after accounting for. Nevertheless, companies that interpret this data as proof that there's little profit in serving black communities are making a big mistake. Many years of undeserving, the black community has created significant opportunities for companies that are willing to look beneath the surface. There are two significant strategies for companies to pursue: expanding local access to goods and services and creating offerings that are better tailored to the needs and preferences of black households. We estimate that companies filling these needs could tap into $300 billion of value annually. That's a significant reason for innovative companies in the United States and globally to compete for this market. There's no denying that black consumption has been constrained, and while it's growing quickly, that growth is starting from a lower base. The steadily rising cost of housing, healthcare, and higher education, needs that are foundational to the quality of life and the possibility of future mobility, are eating up a large share of household budgets for all poor and middle-class American families, particularly for Black households. The share of expenditures Black households direct to these categories rose from 38% in 1984 to 45% in 2019. Our analysis of publicly available but previously uncompiled microdata from the Census Bureau's Consumer Expenditure Survey shows that at similar income levels, Black households spend a smaller share of their income than white households. Although more goes toward the basics, this has not, however, translated into mere liquid savings. More money in Black households goes to giving financial support for extended family, serving higher student debt burdens, and paying higher interest rates on various consumer loans. McKinsey recently surveyed 25,000 Americans to get their views on economic opportunity and the obstacles they face to achieving it. Black respondents were most likely to say that their level of debt had increased over the past year, and they were 50% more likely than white respondents to say that they had student or medical debt. Beneath these sobering realities, however, is a market with substantial buying power and influence, and plenty of upside for the future. In 2019, consumer expenditures by Black households totaled approximately $835 billion. Combined spending by all Black households has increased 5% annually over the past 2 decades. It has outpaced the growth rate of combined spending by white households by 3%, driven mostly by faster population growth. Black consumers are younger, more plugged into smartphones, and more brand aware than other groups. The median age of Black Americans is 34, a decade younger than the median for white Americans. Black consumers are highly digital. They are more likely to own a smartphone, and they use their phones 12% more than white Americans. They are nearly 3 times more likely than white Americans to expect the brands that they use to align with their values and support social causes. Years of underinvestment by the private sector has left some Black communities with a dearth of retail options and key services. For Black households, this can translate into persistent inconveniences, such as taking additional travel time onto errands. It can also have more serious implications, quote, food deserts, close quote, that contribute to poor nutrition, a lack of affordable rental housing, fewer healthcare providers, and gaps in broadband coverage. Most Americans take for granted the convenience of a neighborhood sugar market with many well-stocked aisles and a bounty of choices. But buying healthy, affordable foods is a harder task for the residents of many majority Black communities. 1 out of every 5 Black households is situated in a food desert, with few grocery stores, restaurants, and farmer markets. Unspoken, quote, supermarket redlining, close quote, in many Black communities means that food is more expensive, choice is limited, and healthy organic products are harder to come by. This can reinforce poor nutrition, especially when convenience stores, whose offerings may be considered health-oriented, are more often located in Black neighborhoods. Exhibit 1. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development defines households as, quote, cost burden, close quote, when they spend more than 30% of their gross income on housing, a tipping point that begins to squeeze their ability to spend on other categories. In 2019, 43% of Black households were cost burdens compared with just 25% of white households. This is especially acute among low-income renters. By 53.7% were cost burdened in 2019, and that's before the COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately hit Black incomes. Furthermore, a legacy of discrimination in housing markets results in limited opportunities for families of color to live in areas with higher quality public schools. Much of the nation's rental apartment stock is geographically concentrated in ways that reinforce pockets of poverty and patterns of segregation. Black Americans are nearly 2.4 times more likely than white Americans to live in a neighborhood with limited health care services. This trend exacerbates the other challenges Black patients face when interacting with the health care system, which cumulatively produce worse treatment outcomes. 1 in 4 Black respondents to a Kaiser Family Foundation survey in 2020 reported difficulties in finding conveniently located health care, and almost half reported difficulties finding health care they could afford. Safety net hospitals in both rural areas and inner city neighborhoods are under financial pressures, and some have closed. The importance of healthcare access was underscored during the pandemic, when Black Americans were less likely than white Americans to be successful in their attempts to get tested or vaccinated. COVID-19 deaths were also higher in neighborhoods with socioeconomic vulnerabilities. Black households are 50% more likely than white households to live in areas with limited broadband service. In urban neighborhoods without existing networks, internet service providers often conduct credit checks or require cash deposits from new consumers, policies that disproportionately turn away households. Gaps in broadband coverage and accessibility help create a digital divide that makes it harder for Black Americans to access information, hunt for jobs, do remote work, and engage in remote learning. Yet Black consumers are actually more likely than others to participate in e-commerce. Disparities in broadband connections and computer availability. They have consummated for broadband gaps by becoming more, quote, mobile first, close quote, than the rest of the population. Black consumers account for 23% of U.S. cell phone sales, own smartphones at a slightly higher rate than the overall population, and are more likely than the average consumer to use digital apps for e-commerce and financial transactions. Companies serving these consumers therefore need to design digital experiences and interfaces accordingly. To be continued. Never surrender, never